Welcome to Chain Reactions, a weekly live stream and podcast from myosin.xyz, the leading global marketing network. I'm your host Blake, joined by my co-host Polina, and join us as each week we explore the chain reactions happening across crypto by interviewing the leaders behind the industry's most impactful companies. We go live on X every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern and release a podcast the following week. Let's get started.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is Chain Reactions, a weekly live stream podcast where we talk to amazing people from around the space, co-founders, heads of marketing, the list goes on. Really excited to have our friend Miso on today, talk all about Provenance, RWAs. But real quick, how we doing, Polina? How we doing, Miso? How we feeling?
Amazing.
I'm doing great. Yeah, I had a flight earlier this morning, but I went to the airport and it got canceled. So definitely drove all the way to the airport only for it to not happen. You know, I can't complain about having another day at home.
Yes. Well, you have a lovely place, and it seems like you're living good out there in California. So,
LA weather, it's always nice, right?
It's always sunny, except when they have wildfires, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, okay, well, we're not talking about that today.
Too soon? Sorry. East Coast guy over here. Okay, well, let's get into it. So Miso's an amazing human being. We've known each other for, I guess, over a year now. But for the folks at home, right, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your journey, even pre-crypto, right? Like, how'd you find yourself into crypto in this space, and how'd you end up doing what you're doing now? We always love to start there.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of it was never really a super intentional thing, but I can give a little bit of a roundabout way of how I ended up getting here. For everyone on this live stream, hi, my name is Miso. I've been in crypto for about 2.5+ years now. But really started my career in marketing focused on actually gaming, entertainment, and tech. Started early on doing a lot of digital marketing and social media strategy for AAA video games at Activision, including Call of Duty and launching Destiny and whatnot. Then I moved in-house to do marketing strategy for all of Sony Pictures' major motion pictures. So big things like Spider-Man, Jumanji, and trying to figure out how do we actually take that to market and tell that story to consumers, get butts and seats at the theater, all the way to thinking about things like the Emoji Movie. How do you take something about that is so unbelievably reviled, especially on Twitter, and turn that into a win that ultimately resonates with the right target audience? After that, decided that I wanted to move into somewhere where there was an intersection of entertainment and technology. So that's actually how I ended up as one of the very early first product marketers at TikTok. Did a lot of things from bringing all of their entire self-serve advertising platform for North America to market, scaling that across regions. And then also created tools for businesses to use on TikTok as well. Spent a little bit of time at Meta also working on short form video, and then ultimately ended up coming to crypto. How that actually happens in terms of a jump, it honestly was kind of like a confluence of just kismet, I suppose. My husband has been in crypto for a really long time, since 2017, 2016. Basically investing, going into DeFi, dabbling in all of these different things. And I'd always seen him going through in and out of things. And then I was thinking a lot about like the creator economy and how people can actually monetize because, frankly, being on big tech side, I see a lot of the platforms making a ton of ad revenue money, but it's not necessarily a sustainable way to give back to creators. So I was really looking for a place where I thought maybe I could work on a product that could better the lives of the average creator. And at that time, I believe NFTs were really becoming huge, mainstream, etc. So that was when I just happened to see a role open at Magic Eden and decided to ultimately apply. And that kind of was it. I fell in love with crypto and kind of the beautiful chaos that comes with it. I love how scrappy and thoughtful people are, and the fact that it is so much more community oriented than I think what a lot of marketing is nowadays in Web 2. So yeah, I ended up coming over on the RWA side and I'm really working on thinking about how do we bring more of TradFi on chain, but more importantly, B, how do we tell that story in a way that resonates not only with institutions, obviously, as asset issuers, but more importantly, the importance to the crypto native audience, right? Supporting this in particular, RWA meta, etc., and being able to demonstrate that the value is there, the use case is there, I think it's really incredibly important for people to be able to support that. But more importantly, also really understand how bringing RWAs on chain ultimately really benefits the end user and really allows people to become their own banks.
I think, your path from entertainment and like the emoji movie to RWAs and institutions is like remarkable. So I want to dive in a bit deeper into that, but maybe first, for those who don't know what provenance is, what is it in under a minute or so, like as plainly as you can explain it?
Yeah. So I would say like Provenance is kind of like the sleeping giant of RWAs in particular. So it's an L1, right? And as we know, there are many L1s that exist out there. That was originally started and founded by Mike Cagney and June O, who also co-founded Figure Markets. Figure. Figure in particular, some of you guys might have seen recently make news headlines, right? Which has really always been in the forefront of the RWA industry ever since 2018, right? From figuring out how to actually natively put all of their HELOC, home equity line of credit, for those of you that are not homeowners, on chain, right? To starting their own exchange, Figure Markets, which is really supposed to be the exchange for everything related to TradFi assets and bringing them natively on chain, all the way to even thinking a little bit more about how do they actually take a lot of those assets and move them across chain in a way that allows users to actually be able to interact with real productive yield. So in some, Provenance blockchain is the underlying infrastructure layer for that. Currently, I believe there's over 14 billion and counting in HELOC originations on chain, as well as a variety of other partners such as Vesta Equity, such as Infinio, who are all minting natively different RWA assets on chain.
Awesome. And Figure went like IPO'd, right, earlier this year. So what's the relationship between the infrastructure? You're the CMO of Provenance, right? And I assume you just work closely with the Figure team on their post IPO happy life.
Yeah. We got spun out of Figure, I believe 2 to 3 years ago. However, we still maintain a really tight and close relationship to the Figure team. Definitely completely separate, but still like partner closely to figure out how do we make sure that we're helping in telling that broader Figure story, knowing that they are such a large player within our ecosystem. So it was super cool to actually see, one of the very first real blockchain companies with major profitability who are putting native assets on chain go public. It's been such a pleasure to actually see Mike Cagney share his vision along with the newly minted CEO, Michael Tannenbaum, who is absolutely incredible and a total visionary. He was previously the COO of Brex. So he's very, very familiar with taking a lot of companies public and thinking about how do you run large companies at scale. So just being able to partner closely with the Figure marketing team and really kind of seeing it through their eyes and how do we tell it from a slightly different infrastructure perspective has been really eye-opening, and we're super glad to collaborate closely with them.
This is really cool. And I'd love to chime in here because I think like kind of stepping back from this, it's, RWAs obviously has been like a really hot topic, like like stablecoins, RWAs, and everyone's talking about institutional finance coming to crypto, or vice versa, I guess. But I mean, kind of zooming out for a second, would love to get your hot take on just what do you feel? It's almost like, what's the state of RWAs today, I guess? Because I feel like because so many people are talking about RWA, and now there's like various forms of it, right? There's like tokenized, well, home equity lines of credit is certainly one, right? Then there's bonds, and then people are tokenizing like AI, like mining rigs, like it's all types of crazy stuff. So I guess from Provenance's point of view, like, do you guys always want to focus on HELOCs? Do you guys want to expand and diversify? Um, yeah, maybe let's start there.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of the RWA space, as it has been today, I would say kind of splits into two things, right? One is kind of this sort of tokenization of everything, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about, like mining rigs, et cetera, or even synthetic stocks, right? So representatives of native issuance of stocks that are not on chain, but then creating a token and saying, hey, trust us, we have a proof of reserve, and then we have a middleman management fee, right? And I think at Provenance, there's two things that we really think a lot about when we're thinking about RWAs. And that's kind of why we think about framing ourselves with real assets and real world impact, right? First and foremost, I think the main thing to think about is not everything needs to be tokenized, right? We shouldn't necessarily flood the market with RWAs of tokenization for the sake of tokenization, right? We should always be thinking about, does it actually have like a real meaningful use case, right? And in Figure's instance, right, it makes a lot of sense. It actually helps them in terms of having the proof over and truth over trust, right, of the actual settlement, verification, et cetera, right? Being able to transact on chain makes it a lot easier and more cost efficient, and ultimately kind of cuts out that middleman, saving a lot of costs and being able to pass on those cost savings over to the consumer. That's exactly how they became the #1 non-bank HELOC originator within the United States. So I think that's one piece, right? Not necessarily tokenizing for the sake of tokenizing, but really thinking about, does it actually make sense from the business model value chain perspective? How does this actually bring benefit to the business, right? But then I think when it comes to downstream distribution, especially to other partners, whether that's institutions, whether that is retail and the DeFi space, et cetera, right? I think where we also think a lot about is native issuance is really important, right? Because I think if we think a lot about what is the ultimate ethos of crypto and why it was created and the reason behind it is it was really meant to disintermediate, right? Ultimately cut out the middlemen and be able to put a lot of those pieces of the market in the hands of the actual consumers themselves, right? We think about that a lot from a TradFi space, right? Where banks, they give you your savings account and you have to stick your money in there. And then they may give you maybe between, sub 1% to, oh, how lucky 3%, right? But then the reality is that they're actually then taking your money and being able to participate in a lot of things, such as prime brokerages, being able to participate in productive debt, like HELOC loans are, actually getting that interest, right? Pocketing that difference and then paying you that sort of much smaller amount to be able to have that money. It's almost basically like a free loan. And so the question that we've always asked, right, is with tokenization of, these intermediaries of, like someone buys a stock as like a broker and they hold on to it, and then they issue like a tokenized representation of it, right? Two things, right? One, you don't actually really own or have a major connection to that asset itself. But then also two, you're still getting that middleman. Maybe it's not as intense as maybe like in the more traditional world, right? But there's still that middleman in its way, which is why we ultimately believe that, native issuance is something that is core and critical to provenance. So really, two hot takes, right? Number one is that, not everything needs to be tokenized, but I think a lot of people are starting to finally get there after the first wave of
You're telling me
tokenization.
I shouldn't
But
tokenize my Lobabus and we shouldn't start like a giant,
I mean,
you know?
listen, if that is something that you want to do, I am not going to stop you. I'm just simply saying that's probably not something that we'll end up putting on Provenance. But, if you can create a compelling business and use case for that, by all means, Blake, we can talk more about that. So
We'll take that one
tokenization for the
offline.
sake of maybe we can have that in our separate like Telegram BFFs chat. Like it's totally fine. So no tokenization for the sake of it, but then also at the same time, the importance of native issuance. We definitely do not want to be necessarily contributing to more middlemen stacking fees on top of fees on top of fees. We want to just streamline the value straight from the issuer all the way straight to the hands of whoever it is that's participating in that system.
So
I think it's so
following up on that.
refreshing
Oh, sorry, Billy,
to
go ahead.
have like an L1 that's, usually it's always like when product, when revenue and everything, you kind of start and focus on the business first, and, Figure is already like very profitable, and like you said, it's a sleeping giant, and, the product market fit is pretty much already there, right? So, Blake, if you want to like get into the marketing side of it a bit more, and how what was the Miso's first step when she joined Prof?
Yeah. Well, I guess, yeah. And that's a fair question. So let's bring it back to marketing for a second. And then I do have some other questions about like provenance and Figure, but we'll get back to those. So I think right now, right? So kind of going back to the marketing side, you've been at a bunch of different companies, Meta, TikTok, Magic Eden, Prov. How do you think about marketing for Prov? Because it's a B2B play, right? But also you have to think about retail a little bit. I feel like in my journey, it's been a lot of kind of collecting different skill sets and learnings from different careers and
Yeah.
journeys, and then keep folding that to the next thing. So curious how you've been approaching that with Prov.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think there's a lot in the infrastructure when you're so horizontal and not quite as verticalized, right? That you can't necessarily think about like, oh, it's simply B2B. Oh, it's B2C. Oh, it's B2B to C, right? Like it is the large gambit across all of them because you're playing across so many different ecosystem players, right? So from thinking even about like, when you're growing your overall community, right? You have to be able to think from a B2C tactic of how do you tell that narrative? How do you tell that story? And really thinking a lot about from the consumer lens, how does that brand ultimately show up, right? One thing I thought about when I immediately came to Providence was I thought, and I told June this when I first joined, I was like, listen, there's so much good bones in terms of what there is to work with here at Providence. But I think right now, I want to make sure that the brand actually reflects the innovation, sophistication, the cutting edge, and also a little bit of fun in terms of what Providence really stands for and what it actually really means. Right? And working closely to think about like, how do you kind of translate that into brand identity, tell that consumer story, I think is one arm that I kind of really had to flex when I was thinking a little bit about like my creator or consumer oriented marketing experience. But then on the flip side, right, when you're thinking about B2B to C, right, there's going to be partners that you work super closely with, maybe where, for example, as you guys might have seen, Yields just got announced to be deployed on both Sui and Solana. And while that's not necessarily directly Provenance, right, there is a bigger story to be played and to actually be able to tell in terms of pushing this overarching narrative of supporting native issuance, but also B, the fact that yields on Provenance can actually tie into loan pools and productive debt assets, right? And
Can we
really
can
just
we
thinking
pause
about,
on that one real
yeah,
quick and just talk a little bit
yeah,
about yields so that folks know like it's a stable
yeah.
coin, but like what makes it unique, right? Because there's so many stable coins out there. It can be a bit frothy. There's trustworthy ones, there's non-trustworthy ones. We're assuming it's
Yeah.
trustworthy here, but tell us why. Yeah, and what's so special about it?
Yeah, so I would say that it's the very first SEC registered tokenized asset, right? So it's backed by a variety of different securities, whether that is treasury debt certificates, things like that. A lot of a large combination of different types of securities that actually are usually put into combinations that places like insurance or insurance carriers might actually think about when they're kind of diversifying or making sure that like things are safe and okay. And I think the reason why Mike thought about really putting like this stablecoin on chain was a lot of the challenges of back in the day before we got very pro crypto and TradFi, that there was going to be a need for a stable coin or transacting token that banks could actually be able to use and adopt, right? That's actually something that we think a lot about in terms of we don't want any assets on Provenance blockchain that are not, like I mentioned, tokenization for the sake of tokenization. Ideally, it should be actually backed by true real world assets that are actually tied to things that are connected or grounded in the broader financial ecosystem. And really then thinking about that way, users don't necessarily have to think about, okay, well, where is this yield actually coming from, right? It's actually coming from things that are grounded in the day-to-day things that actually move markets within the Web2 oriented world.
Number one, that makes a lot of sense, right? I love it. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the issue with stablecoins, as we know. Like, people have done so many different experiments, having actual real value, home equity lines of credit against it. It's great. And it's so important, right? Because the worst thing is the stablecoin has to be stable. If it collapses overnight, that's not good either. We'd love to learn a bit. And then I guess like because of all the underlying RWAs, like how does the yield compare on average, right? And then like what are the benefits of using something like that?
Yeah, so I think the yields obviously move according to the rates that the Fed ultimately sets, right? But I would say it's actually quite comparable to a lot of the yields that are currently out there, with the exception of, it's actually a native issuance of a security on chain that is in a stablecoin format that allows you to be able to transfer that peer to peer. Particularly, the one thing to note, right, is with a actual security backed stablecoin, a lot of that still is subject to regulation, and it's something that's really important to think about, right? And I think a lot of the RWA space has taken the stance of, okay, how can we create facsimiles or representations of assets that are based in the real world in order to kind of circumvent a lot of these things? And I think something that, we're proud of working very closely with core partners is really thinking a lot about how do we actually find partners that are thinking about how to do things, not necessarily in the easiest and fastest way, but in the way that probably would make the most sense and benefit the ecosystem in the long term. So while some of these things might move a little bit slower in terms of development, it's not because the team is moving slow. It's because things take a lot of time to go through the system and get these things right. Better to, measure twice, cut once, rather than cut twice and not measure at all.
100%. Oh, sorry. My mic was, I was doing this like mic's spacebar thing. It wasn't working.
You're all good.
We'll love to talk a little bit more about like, I guess, obviously you're working at Prov, but I'm sure you have thoughts on Figure, which is obviously connected, right? So Figure just went public. I think they brought their stock on chain. Can you tell us more about that? And is that something that you guys are planning on doing more of, or for others, or how is that all going to come together?
Like more IPOs on the way.
You never know.
What's there? What's the alpha?
So I don't think I can give necessarily any alpha on that. What I can say is I'm super like proud and excited for the Figure team. I think that is a monumentous occasion. Like I said, I've had conversations with both Michael Tannenbaum and Mike Cagney on kind of their overarching vision and how they're envisioning the transformation of capital markets and how they're really trying to get all of the different pieces all into one massive flywheel, whether that is asset origination, whether that is a marketplace exchange, right, as well as the settlement layer that occurs with it. And I think that like they actually embody all the like sort of key qualities that we really think about when we're looking at different ecosystem partners to bring onto Provenance. And I think, you know, what is really exciting is I believe they dropped a press release, I think 2 days ago, and along with their S1, definitely recommend anyone who's interested in understanding their vision and how that can maybe play out in the implications for the broader crypto ecosystem to definitely look it up and check it out.
So I have a question also. I think it, coincides a lot with the IPO as well, because with Provenance, you're focused a lot on, the institutional side of things, and like that's sort of the core audience. But then you also have to think, because you're in Web3, you have to think a lot about, community building and like retail crypto audiences and appealing to, the crypto masses, right? And with Figure
Yeah.
IPO, it's like a major bullish sign for an ecosystem. And like you said, Provenance is a sleeping giant, and this is like as big of a social proof as you can get that something is clearly working, right? So I'm
Yeah.
curious if you saw that influx of like retail interest on Provenance, and how do you approach like community building of a product that's ultimately not meant like for retail first and foremost.
Yeah. I think I think that there's some very exciting things that will be coming. I think like I was talking to you guys yesterday saying, oh, is like it possible to push our live stream? Because I think there's going to be some really exciting things, especially from like the consumer aspect, that I think would be cool to just like discuss and see like and talk a little bit about like what that potential impact can be. But I do think especially from like an L1 perspective, and this is something that we're thinking about a lot more robustly right now, is I would say that we were so focused on institutions for a really long time. We didn't necessarily think about like the consumers and holders ultimately of the native utility token. How does everything kind of like work and play together? But there was something actually that Jack Liu, the CEO of Magic Eden, used to say about building community that actually resonated really strongly with me. And he's a magnificent speaker. Like anytime that he's on a live stream, everyone I recommend you should listen to him, because the way that he frames things and how he structures his narratives is really excellent. But he said that it's really important to think from a community perspective. Think of a community as like this sort of untapped, like chaotic energy, right? And ultimately, what you need to do with that untapped chaotic energy is that can actually be your friend and be a life force to drive like your objectives, right? Ultimately, you need to figure out how do you give someone the narrative and mission, and also, too, the actual tools to be able to action on it, right? That's something we're thinking a lot more from the Providence perspective that we'll probably be rolling out over the next several months is how do we lean a little bit more into community? How do we get people engaged? And how do we make sure that people can actually feel empowered to take on actions, whether that's just simply talking, whether that's also transacting and participating in the broader Providence ecosystem, to really be able to unite under one mission, which to me, honestly, is being able to actually bring TradFi to the broader Web3 ecosystem. I'm sure, like Blake and Paulina, you guys have been in this space for so long. I feel like the whole end goal has always been to become almost that sort of sovereign ecosystem for the traditional or even the financial system as a whole. And I think just in the last year, there's been so many amazing changes and so many advancements and updates that now I think honestly is the right time for retail to lean in. Now is really the time for people to really choose with their internet money, their magic internet money, how to actually show what the consumers and retail teams actually want.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say as a takeaway, it feels like, your sort of go-to-market approach is very intentional communication. It's not hype driven like many other ones, and no hate for like InfoFi and things like that. I think it's a great tool for when you are building anticipation towards something, but it's not something that you guys tapped into before. I don't know if you have plans to do so to, bootstrap some sort of engagement or things like that. But I think you've always been very intentional with the messaging and the mission for the community. I've seen you yourself like on Discord updating the Provenance community like on the ground. So I think that you're like one of the few CMOs that really understand the power of unscalable. And yeah, I guess I'm trying to say that I'm really curious to see what's gonna happen in the next few days for the consumer element of it all and what's brewing there. But
We're gonna have to do we already kind of talked about this. We will definitely have to do some kind of follow-up at Breakpoint. So maybe we'll do a special live edition in the desert. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think like over the next couple of days, it'll be really interesting to see how everything plays out. And I appreciate, Polina, everything you're saying about leaning into the community. It's something that I try really hard to make sure that partners can feel valued, our retail teams are able to stay updated. And, I think it's always hard, especially when you're in the RWA space and there may be things that can be said, can't be said at that moment in time. But I think that it is really important that we always try to make sure that communities are updated as much as possible.
yeah, and you sit at kind of the intersection of product marketing, ecosystem growth, and obviously like community growth, and I think these are all intertwined, but also there's like a million things to do in each of those verticals. So I wonder what does it, what does your day look like? What is your focus now?
I mean, it's funny when you say what is kind of like your day to day look like and what is your focus. I think a lot of my day just looks very different. Um, Usually a lot of it is kind of constantly thinking about like, okay, what is sort of the roadmap? How are we actually pacing against that, right? How do you actually manage any sort of marketing, go to markets, things like that, to stay aligned with your internal cross-functional partners? And then on the flip side, right, constantly having to meet with new partners, talk to new partners, evaluate what actually makes the most sense at that point in time, and really thinking a lot about, okay, how do we design programs and systems that will make sure that we can actually incentivize like the community to do what we need. I think, it's definitely been a huge learning experience in terms of trying to work through a lot of these things. And I definitely had to wear a lot of new hats, onboarding into the Provenance ecosystem and role. But I think if there's one thing that I appreciate about crypto and sort of everyone who works in crypto, it's resiliency and the adaptability to change and try new things. And that's something that I try to live and strive by every single day.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was also thinking, you said you joined Provenance now a while ago, and a lot of things has changed. The figure yields launched and things like that. And I wonder, like, what are you most excited now for the Provenance at this stage? Like, how do you feel, like the roadmap that you've been thinking about, like when you just came on and you started with, formulating that mission and getting even the team on board, right? First with the mission and like kind of the packaging of it all to now, how did that change?
Yeah, I think that the team has spent a lot of time trying to build out a lot of the core foundations, right? Especially because I think like we can all honestly acknowledge Providence wasn't necessarily as deep in the Web3 or crypto space or ecosystems, right? And that was something that was really important to me to try to figure out how do we tell that story? How do we define what we stand for? Now that we have that, I think going into the new year, a lot of it is going to be a lot more based devils in the details around execution and how do we actually make sure that we can start creating those levers for people to be able to come in and participate. So I think like what you'll see, and I can't exactly say much about it at the moment, you'll see Provenance starting to lean in a lot more into the broader retail and crypto native community. You'll see us putting a lot more time and thought and effort into interacting and building that engaged community around the globe, right? And most importantly, really starting to release a lot of new product updates that I think ultimately, I think a lot of retail consumers will actually be very, very happy about and give them a reason to really participate in the RWA ecosystem in a meaningful way, a truly, truly meaningful way.
It's such I'm like, maybe we should have pushed it back. I feel like there's so much good stuff, but we'll just have to have a follow up.
There's always time. There's always more time, Blake. Like we can always hop on, we can always chat again.
We can always make more time for you. No, I'm dead set on we'll do a live desert one at Breakpoint. We're gonna do something. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to, I guess, so that's all really exciting, right? Community stuff coming. It's very clear that retail is going to be more involved as Prov evolves. And, I just saw some tweets go live, actually, that I think we can talk about it a little bit. It sounds like something's happening tomorrow. But coming back to that, let's talk about Prov and bring it back to institutions real quick. AK, like as you have been marketing Prov and you've been thinking about it, curious how those conversations have been, how that's changed over the past year, like more interest in RWAs, the response that you've heard from institutional players, because obviously through, I think, Mike and June, they have great connections. And I'm sure they're bringing on a lot of heavy hitters and real names. And, so curious how that has, what you've seen, as you're marketing these things. Are people getting smarter? They're vibing with it. They get it.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is honestly the more openness to being able to put assets natively on chain. What I think is really interesting, right, is a lot of people are saying, I have a lot of interest in doing this, but I don't really know how to actually get it done, right? And I think that's where June and actually one of our board of directors, Gwen Francis, right, really come into play. They're meeting with a lot of these institutions that have a ton of interest, but they're not really entirely sure how do you bring it in on chain? How does this all interact, etc. And what I would say is that's great about Provenance, right? It is not even just the tech itself. It's the institutional knowledge that June, as an executive director, really has, right? At this point, she's gone through so many different technical iterations, whether that was, at SoFi in her tech consulting like background prior to that, then as co-founder of Figure, and then also the president of Figure Markets, really kind of shaping that vision of how do you bring assets on chain? How do you think about how they all work? How does this all kind of play into one cohesive ecosystem? She really can serve as someone who is not only a thought leader, but a thought partner to a lot of these institutions. And I think that's something that people deeply, deeply value.
It makes a lot of sense. Having that institutional knowledge, being able to speak to them, I love it. And I met June; she's great, she's sharp. And watching Mike talk and like explain things I was just like, oh, he knows how to convince the normies, if you will. So it's always fun to watch a master work his magic.
Yes, I agree. There's no shortage of amazing ideas both of them like bring, and it's truly like I do think both of them have such a revolutionary mindset. That I think they started this whole journey in 2018 and we're way ahead of everyone else. And every single day, I just kind of listen to them and I'm like, wow, they're thinking probably about 6 steps ahead compared to what anyone else is thinking about.
The tech is catching up to the ideas.
Slowly but surely, right?
can I get your take also on, because yields is the first SEC registered asset, and there's a lot of, I would say, regulatory legal red tape around certain things when dealing with such assets. Do you find this as a blocker sometimes, or how do you go about it? Because with crypto and like financial assets and everything, you have to be sometimes like you have to sometimes sacrifice some of the excitement or this messaging for the sake of being compliant. Do you feel like this is a blocker, or do you feel like this creates an environment for more creative messaging to go around it?
Fortunately, from like the L1 infrastructure side, I don't necessarily have to think as much about that, right? However, I do think that the asset issuers that are coming on to Provenance, that's something to think about super carefully. And it's something that I think, again, with the board members that we have, I also believe Mike Keckman just joined us as a board member on Provenance as well. Having teams with that deep level of experience is just absolutely critical for any company that's looking to put their assets on chain.
Zooming out for a bit, I want to talk geos. I want to talk dream customers. Number one, like what geographies are you guys thinking about? Because obviously, like I think New York is certainly a big thing. US and Western markets are kind of, frankly speaking, a given, right? But how are you guys
Yeah.
thinking about geographical expansion? Like, are you guys trying to launch Asia,
Yeah.
go to market, or how do you think about LATAM? I'm here at Dev Connect right now. There's a lot of people, banks in Brazil, Argentina, beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think like just and it's so funny, you just like read our or read my mind. I think like the APAC markets are something that is definitely, not to be trifled with, as you guys know, right? Especially within Southeast Asia, there's been such a huge embracement and adoption of crypto, and I think that that's such like a great place to really be able to think about in terms of anchoring with innovation, right? So I think definitely the APAC markets is something that we're thinking very, very heavily about. I know that, there's a lot of conversations around Europe as well, knowing that with MICAR and everything that has been passed, there is at least paths. And I think something that we've always said in the crypto space is it's not about whether or not there's rules or regulations, it's a path of clarity of how do you go about approaching these things. So I think like, those are probably the two areas we're focused on first, but LATAM has a very like fond place in my heart. So I'm sure that that will be a fast follow as well.
One day, one day.
One day. There's not enough days to in the year to like get done everything that we want to do, but we can try our best.
It's already basically Christmas. So, I mean, we have Thanksgiving and then boom, it's the holidays. So, yeah,
Don't say
there you go.
that. That now you're making me like anxious and nervous about like all the
Same.
things that are left on my to-do list for the year.
That's all of us, trust me. Yeah. I guess like I just want to be conscious of time. I think we're coming up towards the end here, but would love to kind of zoom out and as we're thinking about the end of the year that's coming up
Yeah.
and an exciting new year, hopefully 2020, it's 2025 right now, right? So 2026 for next year. What are the things that you're most excited about for crypto in general? Obviously, with what you guys are doing with Prov and Figure and some other TBD announcements. Yeah, what are you most excited about?
I think we're at a really interesting inflection point, right? Like if you're thinking about, crossing the chasm from, early adopters all the way to mainstream. I think that we've seen some pretty fundamental shifts happen this past year of like really starting to cross that chasm. And I think it's so great that the industry spent so much time building out the rails and infrastructure this past year alone. So I think that next year is going to be almost that sort of watershed moment where I would say everything starts going like, very mainstream. And I think the other thing that I'm really hopeful for is, for example, we have a good relationship with Privy, right? Really thinking a lot about, okay, we shouldn't necessarily just build solely just for those who actually have grown alongside the early crypto ecosystem. right? If I want like my grandmother or someone or my mom or people to participate in this system, we really have to think about how do we make that as easy and as accessible as possible. And I think the reality of the situation is that a lot of those things might mean that a lot of what we engage with on the day to day get abstracted from the end consumer. And I'm really hopeful and really excited that I think that next year there's going to be a lot more of that, whether that is, banks even experimenting and launching their own stable coins, et cetera. It might not impact us on the day to day as visually or like directly as we might think. But I do think that we are finally at the point where we're going to see large scale adoption.
Ooh, you heard it here first.
Yes.
Next billion users, they're finally coming. We'll see. Are
Next
these next
billion
billion
users,
users in
just
the room?
maybe not in the ways that we think, but I also
Maybe
think
next
that's
week.
not a bad thing, right?
I don't disagree. Don't disagree at all.
We're going
Uh,
to the rapid fire.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Helena if we should move on to the rapid fire. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Should I
Forget.
go?
I think you kick it off and I'll take 2 and 4. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the first one is the most underrated marketing tactic right now in Web3.
I honestly think it is partnerships, right? I think there's like, I feel like I've spent so much time like in crypto where people have been like co-marketing, and with co-marketing, they're like, and it's basically just retweeting each other's posts, right? But I think the more that I connect with amazing marketers within the ecosystem and just how wonderful and like excited they are to collaborate and eager to kind of lean in and say, hey, like, how do we maybe think about this in a more creative way or kind of tell a story or even do events together in a way that feels meaningful and maybe not just an open bar like at a pub or something like that. Um, I think that that is a underrated marketing tactic of really connecting with other great marketers in the ecosystem and thinking about, hey, how can like our two brands work together to really leverage and tell a narrative beyond just the simple standard, I want your reach, you might want mine. Let's just retweet each other's tweets.
Yeah.
I love that.
I very much
Yes.
that super resonates. I actually literally the general framework I've been using for like crypto marketing for a couple of years now is like, especially within crypto, it's like community, content, and partnerships are like the 3 key
Yeah.
legs to the stool, right? And but it's, as you're saying, I feel like people take that partnerships thing very literally, I guess, or not literally, and that they're just like, as you're saying, it's just retweeting. But why are we not actually doing more meaningful content events? I don't know, but somebody's got to do it. So good thing you are.
I mean, we'll see, right? I think like we can do like the best that we can always to try to like tell those stories. Sometimes they might not necessarily always end up resonating in the exact right way, but I do think that now as we're starting to push more and more into mainstream, thinking a lot more about, okay, well, how can we get additional juice out of any partnership that we do, any deals that are done, right? How do we make sure that we're telling like the right stories and leveraging all of the different capabilities, whether that is, for example, shared KOLs or influencers, right? Thinking about how do we create video series together, right? How do we actually show up together in terms of like joint interviews, podcasts, whatever it is, right? Especially with founder mode nowadays being such a incredibly important thing. How do you make sure that you use all of those different assets and people that are at your disposal to tell your story in multiple different formats and angles?
When Provenance TikTok, we'll find out.
So many possibilities.
Providence TikTok is, I think, a ways off. I'm not sure if anyone is going to necessarily resonate with me being like, here's an L1. Let me tell you about that.
Maybe for the new consumer thing, we'll see.
Yeah,
Anyways.
maybe it goes
Maybe.
away.
Yeah, but let's keep moving along because I do want to make sure we stick to the time here. But so we did most underrated. Now, what's the most overrated tactic?
I think it would honestly be the straight sort of pay to play aspect of KOLs, right? I think like there's been a lot of really great ways. I think because there was so much issues in terms of policies for the traditional Web2 marketing in terms of running paid media ads, right? I think it's amazing thing that crypto marketers were geniuses in figuring out how do they actually get that virality, that amplification, that reach, right? But I also think that and I saw this a lot at TikTok too. Like, I think that it's not just about like trying to pay people boatloads of money to show a product that they're not excited about. I think it's really important for both sides of the equation to really lean in and think about what makes sense for the brand when they're working with different influencers and KOLs. Like, what sort of values do they want to represent? Do these people actually buy into the vision, etc., right? And then also vice versa. For influencers, I do think like, they have a right to be choosy and picky about the different projects that they want to talk about and whatnot, right? So I think like there's been a lot of, I think, gamification in a way of trying to just utilize influencers purely for their reach, when I do think it's much more about like, how do we develop a long-term relationship? How do I make sure that like they're bought into the vision and what is coming down the roadmap? How do you actually bring them in into seeing a little bit behind the curtain of like what actually your narrative or your messaging actually means, so you can actually give them the context and not control to be your biggest advocate?
I love that. That's the most, we've had a lot of guests be like KOLs, but I think you just gave the most nuanced description of why and how that could work. So kudos.
Next one is, what brands or projects in Web3 you think are crushing right now that are not Prov, obviously?
Ooh, brands or Web3 that I think are crushing right now. Honestly, I'm actually a huge fan of Hyperliquid as a whole. I just think everything that they have done and the way that they've done it is so authentic to the actual community as a whole, but then also B, have executed flawlessly in terms of being able to deliver on giving like a great product that pairs really well with the overall marketing and narrative. On top of that, I just really do also really love the fact that they're pretty much completely wholly self-made. And it's a project that I think is really important to hold up and celebrate, as this truly embraces the actual ethos of what crypto is meant to be. And I think that they're doing a magnificent job at it.
Chef's kiss. All right. Last one, favorite one. Asked every guest for 3 years the version of this question, which is looking back at the past year, or I guess this year, 2025, what is your kind of biggest professional learning? And it could be multiple if you have any, but yeah.
Biggest professional learning, as in like specifically within the crypto space, as in like with regards to marketing
Totally
or things like
open-ended.
that?
Doesn't even have to be marketing.
Your
It's just like,
interpretation.
it's been a busy year. You've been doing a lot
Yeah.
with Prov. We, like at any company, we have our ups and downs where, mistakes get made and you got to recover and you got to figure things out. Like, it's a nice moment for just like some retrospection, right? Just like looking back at all the stuff. What do you feel like you've learned? And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting. And this gets to be like, I think more, I would say like personal thought or like question. I think something I've always thought a lot about, and part of the reason why I think I've always been a great partner and a great marketer, is that I've always put my partners or the consumers or my work, even my job, my teams, everything first. Right. And I spent a lot of time just constantly thinking about, how do I put myself in the shoes of like the end user, our partners, etc. How do I make sure that everyone has what they need? And something that I would always tell people is, I want to do what's best for all of you. I want to make sure that you succeed. It's actually funny. June gave me feedback where she said, hey, you need to really think about like, how do you put yourself first, right? And how do you make sure that you are not, I guess, proverbially lighting yourself on fire to keep other people warm? And that's something that like I have been spending a lot of time trying to think about. I think especially in crypto, like it's so fast paced and it's so demanding. You could give and give and give forever, and that's the fastest way to burn out. I think we actually hear a lot of even like creators in the space in crypto kind of talk about that, right? The constant grind, the constant chill, the ups and downs, everything. You can do day and night nonstop, and there'd still be so much more to do. So I think like two things when I think about how to interpret that. First piece is how to not, to be more emotionally resilient, and also, recognizing that it's a stressful job sometimes. There's often a lot of people who have a lot of passion and feelings, and that's totally okay. But that's also not necessarily like on me to have to make that always better for someone else. But then also, too, how do I make sure that no matter what, like constantly checking in and taking a second to breathe from the 24/7 of crypto and saying, all right, step back. Are you doing everything that you need to do for yourself so that way you can show up the best way possible for partners, teams, etc. And I think that's something that was a big learning experience this year, but I want to be a lot more intentional about next year.
I love that. It's beautifully said, and I think it reflects the empathy, and it's a lot of empathy is really what I get.
Yeah.
Like ultimate empathy for your users, for your teammates, for the people you work with. But as you're saying, being empathetic to yourself is also important because
First and foremost is always
yes,
key.
gotta
That's
take
the
care
only
of
way we're
yourself,
going to
bro.
survive every single cycle, right?
Yes, yeah. However many
Yeah.
more. Are we in super cycle?
Many
I
more
don't
to
know. We'll
come.
find out. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. A lot of interesting things I feel like coming up right now with regards to AI and the bubble, and kind of like what is the implications of that downstream, especially when it comes to financial markets. So
Money printers coming back on, but then at the same time, recession or tariffs being clawed back. We don't know. Like, we're gonna
yeah,
figure it out.
yeah, and us printing money in order to like pay down like Nashville debt, etc. What is the implication behind that?
You went from
Companies like
positives
investing in other
into such a
companies.
deep dark hole. Like, let's
Sorry.
end on
I'm
a
telling
positive,
you.
please. Super
I'm
cycle.
telling you. It's
We're
just
so
one of those
empathetic. We're
things.
empathetic with all of it. Yeah.
I think that it's important to be realistic about like, hey,
True.
it's always good to acknowledge like the things that are going on, and in a way of in of itself, that's kind of an empathetic thing to even do as well. You can't always pretend to be positive and that everything's good when it might not be, you know?
But we keep
True.
building. So I think we'll be
Keep
all right.
building, keep trying.
All right, Miso, round this out. Last thing, where can people find you? What should they be keeping an eye out for? What should they be thinking about? Let the people know. This is your moment to show some exciting stuff coming up. Where can they
Yeah.
find out?
Obviously keep an eye on Provenance Foundation. In particular, I think like there's something that we've been partnering very closely on with Figure to think a little bit about how to bring the future of capital markets on chain. So pretty exciting things that are going to be coming up down the road. If I actually don't really tweet quite as much nowadays because I think a lot of my time is drafting tweets nowadays, but for other handles, if you do desperately want to follow me for some reason, the real Miso 2049 is my Twitter handle. And then I think something that I just want to encourage everyone to think about is keep your head up. I know that it's a rough market out there and kind of choppy right now, but I do genuinely believe that it's just the start of something really, really big. And I can only hope that some of the things that we're about to roll out in the coming days will bring a little bit of happiness and brightness to the average crypto user in the coming months. Fingers crossed.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, listen, Misa, this is a really great conversation. I always love talking to you. Can't wait to grab a drink with you at some point, maybe in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, I guess, if you end up coming. But otherwise, we'll figure it out. So
I
I'm very
mean, I
excited.
will figure out, I will always move heaven and earth to spend time with the two of you. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me the space to be able to share some of my thoughts, and really, really appreciate it. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Always. All right. So with that, thanks so much, everyone listening on the live stream or on the pod later on. Thanks so much, Miso. And we'll see you online, and have a great rest of the year. Talk to you soon.
See you online.
Thanks,
Ciao.
everyone.
Wait, sorry, guys. For some reason, I can't seem to stop the stream. 2 seconds. We'll have to edit that part out. Hold on. I might have to
I guess
refresh
we're
this.
just stuck here forever.
We're
You
just
know?
stuck in the
That's it.
loop. Hold on. Let me just
I mean,
refresh my page.
I'm not down for us to just start like every single day we're sitting together, just hanging out, and people can just see us just talking.
It's the classic Twitch stream, 24-hour marketer, just work.
Oh yeah.
See how we work.
Oh yeah.
That
Although
actually could be
honestly,
interesting.
like Honestly, unlike, like I'm sure the Twitch streamers where it's like 24 straight hours of playing video games, people are like, woo, so exciting. I think 24 straight hours of marketer work, people would be like, you guys are kind of crazy.
Yeah. They was just doing all the unscalable things, all the drafts, like tweaking every bit of copy, and they would be like, how is this gonna do anything?